Many have tried to rule over the Sith. Almost all of them have failed. The dark side demands dominance, ceaseless, unrelenting, and absolute. The Sith take this further than any being ever should. Their teachings mine into the very heart of the dark side itself, with the ultimate goal to ascend beyond life, to become as a god. But with aspirations of this magnitude, few can lead the Sith. The Dark Lords of old were more than tyrants. They were nightmares made flesh. Their power roared across the pages of history. They were the ones expected to embody every principle that the Sith strive for. And yet, one by one, even they fell. All of them would fall, except for one. Marka Ragnos. Feared in life, revered in death, Ragnos uncovered what so many sought but would never grasp. The true key to ruling over a Sith empire. Only two before him, King Adis and Ajunta Pal, had achieved such perfect supremacy. Only one after him was able to repeat it. And in this holocron, we will revisit the techniques, the teachings that Marka Ragnos used to secure a lasting rule and a peaceful death. The legacy that proved there is only one way to rule the Sith Empire. Welcome back to the archives, Acolytes. Let's begin. While every Sith Lord is known to have gotten their start somewhere, Marka Ragnos seems to have appeared in history as a demigod from the very beginning, a half-Sith, half-human hybrid, one that could be traced back all the way to the bloodlines of the Jedi exiles. While the sources are a bit muddy here, it is assumed that his ancestor was Ajunta Pal himself, the first Dark Lord, the very founder of the modern Sith Order. Ajunta Pal was considered a Gen Jedi, the word that the Sith used for Dark Jedi, but as time went on, the meaning became something more divine. The people of Korriban regarded Ajunta as the physical embodiment of Typhogen, their chief god. So when we say that Ragnos was revered as a demigod, this is not an exaggeration. By pure blood alone, he had claim to the throne of the Dark Lord, regardless of the fact that he was only a half-breed. But no true Sith simply inherits their position. The dark side demands that the Sith's rule should be forged from blood, and blood is what Ragnos would deliver. Knowledge of the wars he fought and the way in which he ascended to the throne have been long since buried and burned by the Jedi. Thanks to them, our understanding of him is little. But what we do know is the legacy that he left. Ragnos had a frightening command of the dark side, and utilized it in the creation of several artifacts. He was known to have wielded an enchanted metal blade that many Dark Lords of his day favored over the use of the lightsaber, and it is also known that he utilized heavy armor. The Sith Marauders and the Juggernauts of Vitiate's later empire would study the teachings of Ragnos directly. This included his battle tactics. They favored charging straight into enemies with heavy armor and even heavier rage. According to legend, Marka Ragnos focused the dark side to become nearly unwoundable in battle. And of course it was said of him that he exemplified the virtues of the Sith. He was imposing, merciless, a master of the Force, and the art of war. All Sith worlds of the Caldera bent the knee to him, else they suffered his wrath. And eventually, he became the Dark Lord of the Sith, officially claiming rulership. But this is where things get interesting. Sith space began to grow rapidly, stretching the very borders of the Empire. And soon, many worlds around them were swearing fealty to the shadowy Dark Lords. In ransom for their lives, tributes from planets all around were paid to Korriban and Ziost, thrusting the Sith into a golden era. They became prosperous, fabulously wealthy. Not a single Sith pureblood walked the streets in anything less than the finest gold and jewelry of the era. And that was a part of his rule that made everyone adore Marka Ragnos. It wasn't just Sith Lords who were living large here, but basically everyone that was not in the slave caste system. In doing so, Marka Ragnos sort of broke the Sith culture in the best way possible. He did not hoard all the wealth unto himself, but allowed it to be used for the betterment of a greater empire. As he ascended, he elevated the Sith around him enough for him to be perceived as gracious without looking weak. It was a delicate balance, as he satiated the cravings of his underlings, but did not feed them enough for them to pose any true threat. The Sith after him would fail to realize the wisdom in this way though. He subjected the other lords by directing their focus elsewhere. Money. Marka Ragnos used the wealth and prosperity of the Empire as a tool of oppression, one that no one realized. They were all too fat, happy, complacent, extremely wealthy. Ragnos controlled them not through the Force, but with gold. But with every Dark Lord, there will be plenty of fellow challengers. Though they enjoyed the fruits of a rich age, they were always still Sith, and the Sith always wanted more. To claim oneself as the ruler of the Sith is to invite challenge naturally after all, otherwise you would not be worthy. Marka Ragnos understood this more than most, because of the preemptive strike against his challengers that he would make. Utilizing his gift of foresight, he was able to perceive all who would be a threat to him. Then, using Palpatine levels of manipulation, he pit his enemies against one another to weaken, or even utterly destroy them. But very few would provoke Ragnos directly. By now, Ragnos hadn't just cemented himself as a force of nature wearing a crown, but had mastered the ways of sorcery and alchemy as well. It is said that only the strongest Dark Lords could learn these arcane arts. Back in this day, this was true. Alchemy and sorcery were the practices reserved for the upper echelons of the Sith Order. Due to their complexity, the ancient Sith saw these arts as a staple of power and status, and many times, the Lords would make certain enchanted artifacts simply because they would wear them as symbols of superiority that others were unable to make. For Marka Ragnos, this would take the form of his scepter, an object with the capability to drain energy from force nexuses, and then redistribute it to grant dark power to anyone that he chose. It could even endow non-force sensitive beings with power, though it was directly connected to his scepter always. We know of only one instance of a man that challenged Marka Ragnos for the title of Dark Lord. That man's name is Simus, and their duel was known to be incredibly brief, ending with Simus being decapitated by Ragnos' blade. However, the servants of Simus managed to rescue his body and place his dismembered head within a magical crystal which kept him alive indefinitely. Once Simus returned, Ragnos was so impressed with his survival that he elevated the beheaded man to being his personal advisor. This proves the other secret to Ragnos' rule. He was ruthless, but he was also rewarding. He earned the adoration of the other Dark Lords through his ability to dominate and then elevate in the same breath. Marka Ragnos recognized an enemy's strength, and he had the discernment to know when it was useful to him and when it was a real threat. And a contrasting event to this situation was the fateful meeting between Marka Ragnos and a very young Vitiate. At the time, the boy was known as Tenebrae. He had conquered his entire home planet by the age of 9, and once he was around 13, he had the entire world's population under his control. It was then where he would seek out Marka Ragnos for 2 requests: to be recognized as the leader of his world, and to become the Dark Lord's direct apprentice and disciple. Marka Ragnos was greatly impressed by the young boy's power and ambition, so he would not only recognize him as the ruler of the planet, but also bestow upon him the title of Darth, naming him Darth Vitiate. However, Ragnos could perceive that this boy was not normal. He foresaw great power and terror in Vitiate's future. And so, to protect himself and his own interests, Marka Ragnos denied taking Vitiate as an apprentice and sent him away with more riches. For an entire century, Marka Ragnos ruled unopposed, watching over the golden age of his empire. When he died, Marka Ragnos would pass on peacefully rather than violently. The Empire itself wailed at his passing, and his funeral procession was the grandest that the Empire would ever see. It was said that his tomb became a dark side nexus point which had the power to drive Jedi mad and to corrupt almost anyone to the dark side. But while the Sith Order mourned his passing, his spirit lingered, continuing to carry out his plans to restore the Golden Age. However, he was unable to act for himself as a spirit, and so he had to work through other men with ambitions different from his own. All would fail him because none were like Marka Ragnos, none of them except perhaps one, who he refused to teach. While Darth Vitiate did not attain the training that he desired, he continued to watch Marka Ragnos from the shadows and took great notes. Because he would become the Sith Emperor next, he would emulate many of his predecessor's successes. Vitiate led an empire to prosperity by making them worship him. He was willing to gut his own Dark Council if they defied him. And as Valkorian, he manipulated his enemies into destroying one another, and even linked the Knights of Zakul to him, endowing them with his own power in the Force. And as we mentioned, while he was the Emperor of the Sith, he made the Juggernauts follow the teachings of Marka Ragnos to become unstoppable in the realm of battle. To rule the Sith, one needs a very special touch, a type of wisdom, cunning, and overwhelming power that was shown only by one being in its full. Marka Ragnos lived and breathed the balance of risk and reward when dealing with his subjects. He did not just speak the language of the Sith, he spoke the language of the dark side. He knew when to show force, when to be gracious, when to be merciless. And yet, while he was generous with his wealth, he was selfish with his wisdom. Refusing to take an heir or an apprentice meant that his teachings passed on to no one, and in the very days following his death, the Empire would crumble. And this now poses a deeper question. Can the Sith only ever be ruled by a single man? King Adis established the legacy of the Sithari, who was a supposedly perfect being which could destroy the Sith and then remake them. Marka Ragnos may have come close, but he was no Sithari. But could it be that he was a better alternative? We may never know for sure, as every one of Ragnos' returns would be met with failure. And tragically, the Sith seemed to take all the wrong lessons from his reign. But anyway guys, thank you so much for joining us today in our archives, and until next time my friends, may the Force be with you.